In this short tutorial, we will have recorded a short video clip, which we will export into a image sequence. This image sequence we will load into Maya 2018, and then we will render our objects from Maya on top of this image sequence with proper shadows, a proper shadow layer. So the first thing we want to do is import our media into Davinci Resolve, which I'm using. I made this video yesterday. It's from my phone, so it's really bad quality, but so your quality should probably be better than mine. I want to open it, and I don't want to change my timeline frame rate because I want to keep my timeline frame rate at 24 frames per second. If you want to see what your timeline frame rate is, you can go to File and Project Settings. Here will be your timeline frame rate. This is the one you will render with. So I'm going to take my video reference here, it's just me filming on my table at home, and add it to our video output. This is the area we can work with in Davinci Resolve. But this is not a Davinci Resolve, this is just a quick tutorial on Maya. Now that we have our video in the timeline set to 24 frames per second, we just want to render it out as an image sequence. So what we want to go to is go to Deliver. Over here there's some customs and setups on how you can send out your, render out your video within Davinci Resolve. For this purpose I'm just going to use 1080p. As YouTube, I'm just going to use that preset. The format I am going to change to a TIFF file. TIFF is an image format. You can only export as TIFF in Davinci Resolve. You can't export as, for instance, PNG, which you might be used to. I'm going to change the code to RGB 16 bits. So I will also go into the little file subfolder here and change the custom name. This is the name of the image sequence. And then down here is the amount of digits that will appear after the sequence. For instance, if you're only gonna have under 1,000 images, 3 digits should be enough. And then I would like each clip to start at frame 1. That would just make sure that the first one is named 001. Then I add this to the render queue, and I just render it out. This should give me the image sequence of the video, but now as a TIFF file. So I can go into my tutorial folder, videos, images, and here I have the sequence starting at 001, and I have 196 images. So frames going 24 frames per second. Now that we have our image sequence, we can move on to Maya. First of all, we want to create camera. This is the camera we will render through, and also we should have the image plane. So I'm just gonna create a normal camera. It will always be created in center. The front view, I'm not gonna use the front view for anything, so I'm gonna go to view and go cycle through camera. Now everything that is that you view in this part down here is through the camera. So when I move the camera in my perspective view, you can see it will also move in this camera view. Then we need to have an image plane as a reference for this camera. So we're going to go to View, Image Plane, Import Image. Now you should locate your the location where you saved your image sequence. For me, it's here. You just click the first one and click Open. As you can see, the image plane will follow your camera around as it's sort of linked to this now. Select the image plane shape. Here you want to click use image sequence, and it should automatically use the image sequence located in the folder. I'm going to press this view and I'll scrub through. You can see the camera is moving. Next up, we want to set the preferences for our animation. We click this little running guy down here. I have, in my animation, I have 196 frames in the video, and I have the same I put in my animation start end. Then I don't want to play every frame. I want to run 24 frames per second, because this is the same which we use in our video. It's just important to, if you have 24 frames per second in your exported from Davinci, you should have 24 frames per second in here as well. You can use other playback speed if you want, but just make sure that it's consistent. Press save and press run down here. You should see the image plane moving accordingly to the video. Next up, I want to try to adjust my camera to make it fit the table. So I know I kind of had my camera a little bit angled on the table. I usually just try to make the grid fit. So I'm just gonna fiddle around with this a bit until I feel like it's a good fit. I like to have a table such as this, or something that you use as a reference. It makes it way easier for you to put your camera. So be right back. Okay, this is as good as I get it now. For this point it will work just fine. The more time you spend on it, the more precise you can be, obviously. You can always fiddle around a little bit. Now you want your object in scene. You might already have made your object, and I just made one myself. I made a little cube. I also added a little animation to it because I was unsure if the purpose of your hand was only a still image or an animation. So it just turns around a bit and it jumps away. So it's good. We have the cube. We can press render view. I'll try and render it, but now it will just be black because Arnold will only render if we have lights in the scene. So we need to create some lights. Usually it's nice if they resemble the setting you put it in. Now I don't have a proper lighting, as you've learned in class, with backlight, fill light, and the main light. But I only have my table lights, so I will try to recreate my table lights within this Maya scene. You can always go to the Arnold render view. If you click this button up here, it will live render whenever you make any changes to your scene. So for instance, if I take this light and put it right on top of my objects and add light intensity to it, even more intensity, it should light up in the magic color. As you can see, I added a point light to the scene. That's just because when you have lights in a room, light bounces everywhere. I just used the point light in this case because you can't use the ambient light with Arnold to create all the bounces of the room, so the actual cube to get some light. However, it still doesn't look real, so we are going to have to create a plane that the cube should reside on. I also cheated a bit and put this one in my picture, so I could see kind of where my shadows needed to land. So once again, I will go into my charge and try to fix my light the way I want it to be. Also, I'm gonna turn off shadows created by my ambient light. This is kind of a decent fit for my cube. The reason why the shadow is so prolonged is because I have it slightly elevated in the air. Now you are, as me, ready to render this picture, but there are some things that we don't want and some things that we do want. For instance, we want the cube to be rendered with its shadow, but don't want the plane to be rendered, obviously. So what we want to do is create a render layer which allows the cube to be rendered and the shadows. To create a render layer, there is a box here. If you have this one, it's launch the render layer setup, or you can go to Windows, Rendering, Render Setup. Here it displays everything that is going to be rendered. Right now, this scene is being rendered and it will render everything. So we want to create a new render layer, and let's start by only rendering the shadow. So we're going to call this the shadow layer. Good. When we click this visible, we can see what will be rendered by this layer. So right now, nothing, because nothing has been attached to the layer. To attach a collection of items, we can right click and create collection. Our first collection will be of the cube, because we want the cube shadows, but we don't want the cube, so we need to have the cube in here. So we want the cube, and this over here is how you add. This is where you add things to your collection. For instance, my dice is a cube out here. I can middle mouse drag it over to my nodes, and now my cube is being rendered. As you see, it pops up. Also, I will drag my camera over so I can see things from my camera view. Then, now it's the transforms of the object. I want that to be in, so we need to make a group, a collection underneath this, where you just write star, and this will have the same as before, but we only want the shapes of the form. The reason we do this is the only way we can do so the cube will not be rendered in the final view. Okay, for the shadow layer we also need to create a collection for the plane. Let's call this plane. And same thing as before, we just middle mouse drag our plane over in the nodes. So now we have the same as before. Very good. Let's start with the plane. The plane, we want to create a material override. This material is new in 17 and 18, so you have 16, it's not going to work, and it's also only for Arnold. The material we want to use is the one called AI Shadow Matte. What AI Shadow Matte does is it takes the plane or whatever object it's attached to and will only render out the shadows. So as you can see right now, this is our render. In theory, we could render it like this, but usually it's really nice to have both the shadow layer and the beauty layer so you can manipulate them individually. So that's what we're going to do for this tutorial, but in theory you could render this out and this will be fine as well. What I want to do is go into my collection here of the cube, and I want the cube selected in my attribute editor over here. So I'm going to select it, and I close it down by accident. So we want this back. Good. Now that I have my cube selected, I want to tell it not to render. So, and this is the primary visibility. If you can see when I click this, it just disappears. So I'm going to right click this and create an absolute override for the visible layer. This is the layer I'm currently on. So when I go in here, now it's an attribute of my collection layer, and when I turn this off, this will not be rendered with my shadow layer. Cool. All that's left now is to create a beauty layer. So we're going to go to create new render layer, and we're just going to call this beauty layer. Good. Make it visible. We want the camera. We want to create a collection first, then we want the camera, and then we want the cube. And we want to look at the cube through the camera. Very good. Good. So now we have one render where we have the cube only, and one layer where we have the shadows only. If it wants to work. Doesn't. Okay, I don't know what happened, but we have our two layers, and those are the ones we want to render. In here you can see the little checker box. This means that it will render when you render it, and there's no reason for me now to render out the main scene, because then it will render with the plane. So I'm just going to turn this off. Next off, we are going to, I don't need this anymore either. We're going to go into our rendering menu and go into render settings. Here we are going to choose what format we want to render it as, and we want to render it as a TIFF file, because also the Arnold renderer will not allow you to render alpha layers, and we want alpha layers for the shadows. So you need to create a TIFF layer, and for the presets I'm just going to use HD 1080, because I want the same aspect as I had from my image sequence. And the rest of the purpose of this I'm just gonna leave blank. I want to make sure we use the Arnold renderer though. Yes, I want to render not only a single frame, I want to render out the whole animation. Then I want to choose my name, then the number, because this is also going to be rendered as an image sequence, and then the extension, and then the TIFF file in the end. And I want it to be from now my animation is only 55 seconds, 55 frames long, really short. So I'm just going to render with the 60 frames. That should do it. Then, before rendering though, because we don't want to render the image plane, one important thing you have to turn off is over when you select your camera. It's your image plane shape. So when I select the camera, we usually come up here, and my image plane shape is over here, and I don't want to render my image plane, so I'm just gonna display mode, set it to none. This will disable it from rendering. Now you can see my shadow layer is totally black, which is fine, because when I hit the alpha, then it should just display like the white outline where my cube's shadow is supposed to be. And now, making sure that it's the same for the future layer. Now we're ready to render. Now we can hit render, render sequence, enable layers, enable cameras, and we had set the settings before. So now we're rendered. And wait. All that's left to do is combine everything inside Davinci Resolve or whatever compositing software you're using. So I'll start by just importing the image sequence we created earlier. I'm just going to select all of them and hit import. Put them in my timeline. Then I'm going to import the beauty layer and the shadow layer. Then I'm going to locate my Maya folder, project, dice example, and images. In here it has rendered out 2 folders. Beauty layer, let's import that first. And the shadow layer. Cool. I'm just going to place this on top of the image sequence. And here we have the dice in there with this animation. And then we're also going to import the shadow layer. And the shadow should be underneath the underneath our dice. Just can move this down a bit. And when we run the animation, it should, and this is then the finished result. On the full screen, you can go to color, hit Control F, and there's the full screen of it. So that's it for this tutorial.